The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Kensington Palace as Sarah Ferguson carefully sorted through the belongings in Diana's former private study. 2 years had passed since the tragic accident in Paris, and the task of organizing the late princess's personal effects had finally fallen to her closest friend. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened each drawer, knowing that somewhere among these items lay secrets that could change everything the world thought they knew about Diana's marriage to Prince Charles. The study remained exactly as Diana had left it. Books scattered on the mahogany desk, photographs of William and Harry smiling from silver frames, and a small stack of letters tied with blue ribbon. Sarah had been putting off this particular room, knowing how intensely private Diana had been about her inner thoughts. The princess had always been careful about what she shared, even with her dearest friends. As Sarah reached for a leather-bound book wedged between 2 photo albums, her heart stopped. The cover was worn and weathered, clearly handled many times. In Diana's distinctive handwriting, the words, "My Truth," were embossed in fading gold letters. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized what she was holding. Diana's private diary, the one she had mentioned only once during their many late-night conversations about the troubles in her marriage. With shaking hands, Sarah opened the diary to the first page. The date was from 1987, just 6 years into Diana's marriage to Charles. The elegant handwriting filled page after page, chronicling not just the public appearances and royal duties, but the private moments that had shaped Diana's understanding of her place within the royal family. Each entry revealed layers of complexity in Diana's relationship with Charles that the media had never suspected. The early entries spoke of Diana's genuine hope for her marriage, her desire to be a good wife and mother, and her confusion about Charles's distant behavior. She wrote about trying to understand his world, his passions, and his need for solitude. But as Sarah read deeper, the tone began to shift. Diana had started documenting conversations, recording not just what was said, but what was left unspoken. She had been far more observant than anyone realized. One entry from 1989 made Sarah's hands shake. Diana had written about a conversation she overheard between Charles and his private secretary about managing the situation regarding her growing popularity with the public. The words suggested that even then there were discussions about how Diana's natural charisma was overshadowing the heir to the throne. Diana had recorded her realization that she was seen not as a partner, but as a problem to be solved. The diary revealed Diana's growing awareness of the complex web of relationships within the royal family. She had documented private conversations with Queen Elizabeth, noting the Queen's concerns about modernizing the monarchy while maintaining its dignity. Diana had written about her mother-in-law's struggle to balance her role as Charles's mother with her duties as sovereign. These insights painted a picture of a royal family far more human and conflicted than the public ever knew. Sarah discovered entries detailing Diana's relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, but not in the way the tabloids had portrayed it. Diana had written about her early attempts to befriend Camilla, not knowing about her history with Charles. The diary revealed Diana's gradual understanding of the true nature of Charles and Camilla's relationship, and her devastation at realizing she had been welcomed into a marriage that was never truly hers. The most shocking entries dealt with Diana's growing awareness of how her every move was being monitored and reported back to Charles and his inner circle. She had documented specific instances where private conversations with friends had somehow made their way back to her husband. Diana had begun to suspect that even within her own household, there were people whose loyalty lay elsewhere. This revelation had led her to become increasingly careful about what she shared and with whom. As Sarah continued reading, she found entries describing Charles's reaction to Diana's charitable work. The diary revealed that while the public saw a supportive husband, privately, Charles had expressed frustration with Diana's ability to connect with people in ways he found difficult. Diana had recorded conversations where Charles questioned her methods, suggesting that her emotional approach to royal duties was inappropriate and potentially damaging to the monarchy's reputation. The diary also contained Diana's thoughts about her sons and her fears for their future. She had written extensively about her desire to give William and Harry as normal a childhood as possible while preparing them for their royal responsibilities. Diana had documented her concerns about the pressure they would face and her determination to shield them from the worst aspects of royal life. Her love for her children permeated every page, along with her worry about how her troubled marriage was affecting them. One particularly poignant section revealed Diana's internal struggle with her public image versus her private reality. She wrote about feeling like an actress playing a role, smiling for cameras while her marriage crumbled behind palace doors. Diana had documented the exhaustion of maintaining appearances, the careful choreography of public events designed to project unity and happiness that didn't exist in private moments. The final entries Sarah read that day dealt with Diana's decision to fight back against the forces she felt were trying to control and diminish her. The princess had written about her realization that remaining silent would not protect her or her children. She had begun documenting everything, not out of spite, but out of a growing conviction that the truth needed to be preserved. Diana had written that she hoped her words would one day help people understand the real woman behind the crown and the real story behind the fairy tale marriage that had captivated the world. As Sarah closed the diary, she knew she held something that could shake the very foundations of the royal family. The question now was what to do with Diana's truth, knowing that her friend had trusted her enough to leave these secrets in her care. The rain continued to fall against the windows, and Sarah sat in the growing darkness, holding the weight of Diana's hidden world in her hands. Sarah Ferguson spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with her discovery. The diary sat locked in her bedroom safe while she paced the floors of her home, knowing that Diana's words could expose secrets that had been carefully guarded for over a decade. Finally, she made a decision that would change everything. She called the one person she knew Diana had trusted above all others, her private secretary and confidant Patrick Jeffson, who had remained loyal to Diana's memory even after her death. When Patrick arrived at Sarah's home, his face was grave. He had suspected that Diana might have kept detailed records of her experiences, but seeing the leather-bound diary confirmed his worst fears and greatest hopes simultaneously. As Sarah handed him the book, Patrick felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Diana had often spoken to him about ensuring that history would remember the truth, not just the official version of events. Patrick spent the entire weekend reading every word Diana had written. The diary contained far more than either he or Sarah had imagined. Diana had documented not just her personal struggles, but also conversations about state matters, royal protocols, and political discussions that she had overheard or been part of. The princess had been far more politically aware than anyone had given her credit for, and her observations about the monarchy's relationship with the government were both insightful and potentially explosive. One section that made Patrick's blood run cold dealt with Diana's suspicions about how information was being leaked to the press. The princess had carefully tracked which private conversations later appeared in newspapers, and she had begun to identify patterns. Diana had written about her growing certainty that someone very close to the royal family was feeding stories to journalists, not to protect the monarchy, but to control public opinion about specific family members. The diary revealed that Diana had confronted Charles about these leaks during one of their final private conversations as a married couple. According to her account, Charles had not denied that information was being strategically released, but had argued that it was necessary to manage the royal image in an increasingly hostile media environment. Diana had written that this conversation was the moment she realized their marriage was not just emotionally over, but that she was seen as an enemy to be managed rather than a wife to be supported. Patrick discovered entries describing Diana's meetings with senior courtiers and royal advisors. The princess had documented conversations where she was told that her popularity with the public was becoming a problem for the institution of the monarchy. Diana had been advised to step back from certain charitable causes and to be more careful about showing too much emotion during public appearances. The diary revealed her frustration with being asked to make herself smaller to make others comfortable. The most shocking revelation came in entries from 1994, the year Charles admitted his adultery in a television documentary. Diana had written about being informed of the interview only days before it aired, despite its obvious impact on her and their children. The diary contained her raw emotions about being publicly humiliated while being expected to maintain her dignity and continue with her royal duties as if nothing had happened. Diana had also documented the pressure she faced to remain silent about her own experiences. The diary revealed meetings where she was essentially threatened with loss of access to her children if she spoke publicly about her treatment within the royal family. Diana had written about feeling trapped between her desire to tell her truth and her need to protect her relationship with William and Harry. These entries showed a woman fighting not just for her own dignity, but for her role as a mother. Patrick found detailed accounts of Diana's charitable work that painted a very different picture from the one presented in the media. The diary showed that many of her most meaningful projects had been opposed or undermined by senior royals who felt her hands-on approach was inappropriate. Diana had written about being criticized for hugging AIDS patients, for visiting homeless shelters without advance notice, and for speaking too emotionally about the causes she supported. The diary also contained Diana's private thoughts about the future of the monarchy itself. The princess had written extensively about her concerns that the institution was too rigid to survive in a changing world. She had documented conversations with ordinary people who felt disconnected from the royal family, and her entries showed a woman who understood that the monarchy needed to evolve or risk becoming irrelevant. Diana had seen herself as part of that evolution, and her forced removal from the equation had deeply troubled her. One particularly painful section dealt with Diana's relationship with the Queen Mother. The diary revealed that the older woman had been far less supportive of Diana than the public believed. Diana had written about feeling judged and found wanting by the Queen Mother, who had apparently made it clear that she viewed Diana's modern approach to royal duties as dangerous to traditional values. These private conversations had left Diana feeling even more isolated within the family she had married into. As Patrick read about Diana's final years, he discovered entries that showed her growing confidence and determination to create a new life for herself. The princess had written about her plans to use her global platform to make a real difference in the world, freed from the constraints of royal protocol. Diana had been developing relationships with world leaders, business people, and activists who could help her achieve her humanitarian goals. Her death had cut short not just her life, but ambitious plans that could have changed how royalty engaged with global issues. The diary's final entries were dated just weeks before Diana's death. In them, she wrote about feeling both hopeful and fearful about her future. Diana had expressed concerns about powerful people who might want to stop her from becoming too independent or influential. She had written about feeling watched and followed, and her growing paranoia about her safety. Reading these final entries, Patrick felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The last entry was dated the day before Diana left for Paris. In it, she had written about her love for her sons and her hope that they would understand the choices she had made. Diana had expressed her desire for William and Harry to learn from her mistakes and to find ways to serve the public while remaining true to themselves. She had also written a message that now seemed prophetic. If anything happens to me, I want the world to know that I never stopped trying to do what was right, even when it wasn't easy. As Patrick finished reading, he knew that he and Sarah now faced an impossible choice. They could protect the royal family by keeping Diana's secrets buried, or they could honor her memory by ensuring that her truth was finally heard. Either decision would have consequences that none of them could fully predict. After weeks of careful consideration, Patrick Jeffson made a decision that surprised even Sarah Ferguson. Instead of going directly to the media or publishing the diary, he chose to approach Prince William first. Diana's eldest son was now 18 years old and had the right to know what his mother had truly experienced during her final years. Patrick requested a private meeting through William's personal protection officer, using a code phrase that Diana had taught her son, one that would signal the matter was of utmost importance and completely confidential. The meeting took place at Highgrove House on a gray March morning. William arrived looking older than his years, already bearing the weight of royal responsibility on his shoulders. Patrick had brought only selected excerpts from the diary, choosing passages that revealed Diana's love for her sons and her hopes for their future, while avoiding the most potentially damaging revelations about other family members. Even these carefully chosen entries left William visibly shaken. As William read his mother's words about her fears for his future and her determination to shield him from the worst aspects of royal life, tears filled his eyes. Diana had written about watching her sons navigate the complex world of royal protocol while trying to maintain their humanity. She had documented her pride in William's intelligence and compassion, but also her worry that the system would try to change him into someone he was not meant to be. The young prince was particularly moved by entries describing Diana's internal debates about how much truth to share with her children. The diary revealed that she had wanted to protect William and Harry from adult problems while also preparing them for the reality of their positions. Diana had written about the delicate balance between honesty and age-appropriate guidance, and her determination to let her sons be children for as long as possible. William spent nearly 3 hours reading and rereading his mother's words. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. The boy who had entered the room was gone, replaced by a young man who now understood the full complexity of his mother's situation and the forces that had shaped her final years. Patrick watched as William processed not just his mother's pain, but also her strength and her unwavering commitment to doing what she believed was right. After a long silence, William asked Patrick what he intended to do with the diary. Patrick explained that he felt obligated to honor Diana's wishes, but that he wanted William's guidance before taking any action. The young prince requested time to think and asked Patrick to keep the diary secure until they could meet again. William also insisted that Harry should be told about the discovery despite his younger age. Diana's second son deserved to know that their mother had left them a record of her truth. The meeting with Harry took place a week later in the same location. At 15, Harry was more emotional in his response to his mother's words. The diary, entries about his personality and his struggles with royal life, resonated deeply with him. Diana had written about Harry's rebellious spirit and her hope that the family would find ways to channel his energy positively rather than trying to suppress his natural character. Harry was particularly affected by entries describing Diana's guilt about the impact of her troubled marriage on her children. The diary revealed that Diana had been acutely aware of how the tension in the household affected both boys, and she had documented her efforts to create moments of normalcy and joy despite the circumstances. Diana had written about wanting her sons to understand that the problems between their parents had nothing to do with them and everything to do with adult complications they were too young to understand. Both princes were struck by their mother's political awareness and her understanding of global issues. The diary showed that Diana had been far more than just a beautiful figurehead. She had been a thoughtful woman who understood the power of her position and wanted to use it responsibly. Her entries about meeting world leaders, discussing international affairs, and developing strategies for her charitable work revealed an intelligence and sophistication that had been largely hidden from the public. The brothers spent several days discussing what they had learned about their mother. They realized that while they had lost her at a young age, they were now being given the chance to know her as an adult woman, not just as their mother. Diana's diary entries showed them a person who had struggled with many of the same issues they were facing: the balance between public duty and private happiness, the challenge of being authentic while meeting royal expectations, and the difficulty of maintaining relationships under intense scrutiny. William ultimately made the decision that would determine the diary's fate. After consulting with Harry and spending countless hours thinking about their mother's wishes, he decided that selected portions of the diary should be shared, but only in a controlled and respectful manner. The brothers wanted their mother's voice to be heard, but they also wanted to protect other family members from unnecessary pain and embarrassment. Patrick was tasked with creating an edited version of Diana's writings that would focus on her personal growth, her charitable philosophy, and her thoughts about motherhood and royal duty. The most sensitive material about other family members would remain private, sealed away for future historians who might better understand the context of Diana's experiences. This decision represented a compromise between Diana's desire for truth and her son's need to maintain family relationships. The process of editing Diana's words was painstakingly careful. Patrick worked with a small team of trusted advisors, including Sarah Ferguson and Diana's former speechwriter, to ensure that the selected passages accurately represented Diana's voice while avoiding unnecessary scandal. They focused on entries that showed Diana's evolution from a young royal bride to a confident humanitarian leader. The edited diary revealed Diana's growing understanding of her own power and influence. Her later entries showed a woman who had learned to navigate the complex world of international diplomacy while maintaining her commitment to helping society's most vulnerable members. Diana had written about her realization that her royal title, which had once felt like a burden, could be transformed into a tool for positive change. As news began to circulate discreetly among senior courtiers that Diana's private writings had been discovered, the reaction was swift and concerned. Palace officials who had thought Diana's secrets were buried with her suddenly faced the possibility that their own actions might be scrutinized through her eyes. The prospect of Diana's diary being made public sent waves of anxiety through the very corridors of power where these events had originally unfolded. Charles himself remained unaware of the diary's existence, but those closest to him began preparing for the possibility that his former wife might, even in death, have the final word in telling their story. The careful balance of public perception that had been maintained since Diana's death suddenly seemed fragile and uncertain. The news of Diana's diary finally reached Prince Charles through his private secretary during a quiet Sunday morning at Highgrove. Charles had been reviewing his schedule for the upcoming week when Sir Michael Peat entered his study with an expression that immediately told the Prince of Wales that something serious had occurred. The conversation that followed would forever change how Charles understood his late wife and the marriage that had defined so much of both their lives. Sir Michael carefully explained that Diana's private writings had been discovered and that William had already been briefed on their contents. Charles listened in stunned silence as his secretary outlined the scope of Diana's documentation and the potential implications for the royal family. The Prince of Wales had always known that Diana was observant and intelligent, but the idea that she had been systematically recording their private conversations and her observations of royal life left him feeling exposed and vulnerable. Charles's first reaction was anger. He felt betrayed by the idea that his former wife had been documenting their most intimate moments and private discussions for posterity. The prince had always valued his privacy above almost everything else, and the thought that his words and actions had been recorded without his knowledge struck him as a fundamental violation of trust. His hands shook as he held the brief summary of diary entries that Sir Michael had prepared for him, but as Charles read Diana's actual words, rather than summaries of them, his anger began to transform into something more complex. Diana's entries, revealed not just her pain and frustration, but also her genuine efforts to understand him and make their marriage work. The diary showed a woman who had tried desperately to find common ground with a husband who seemed determined to maintain emotional distance. Charles saw himself through Diana's eyes, and the image was not flattering. One entry that particularly shook Charles described Diana's attempts to interest herself in his passion for architecture and organic farming. The diary revealed that she had spent hours studying these subjects, not because she found them naturally compelling, but because she hoped to create opportunities for meaningful conversation with her husband. Diana had written about her disappointment when Charles dismissed her questions as superficial or showed impatience with her lack of background knowledge. Another section detailed Diana's observations of Charles's relationship with his staff and advisors. The diary showed that Diana had recognized the influence that certain courtiers had over her husband's decisions, sometimes to the detriment of their marriage and family life. Diana had written about feeling like an outsider in her own home, unable to compete with advisors who had Charles's ear and seemed to view her as a threat to their influence. The diary entries about Camilla Parker Bowles were perhaps the most difficult for Charles to read. Diana had documented her growing awareness of Camilla's continued presence in Charles's life with a mixture of hurt, anger, and resignation. But the entries also revealed Diana's attempts to understand the relationship from Charles's perspective. She had written about recognizing that Charles and Camilla shared a history and compatibility that she had never been able to match despite her best efforts. Charles was struck by Diana's maturity in her later entries. Rather than simply expressing bitterness about their failed marriage, Diana had begun to analyze the systemic problems that had made their relationship so difficult. She had written about the impossible expectations placed on royal marriages, the lack of privacy that made intimate relationships nearly impossible to maintain, and the way that public scrutiny had poisoned their ability to work through normal, marital problems. The prince found himself remembering conversations and incidents that Diana had recorded, seeing them now from her perspective rather than his own. Events that he had dismissed as unimportant or had forgotten entirely were revealed to have been deeply significant to Diana. Charles began to understand how his actions and words had affected his wife in ways he had never considered at the time. 1. Particularly painful entry described Diana's feelings on the day Charles gave his television interview admitting to his adultery. The diary revealed that Diana had known about the interview in advance, but had been powerless to prevent it or even to prepare their children for what was coming. Diana had written about feeling like she was being publicly executed while being expected to maintain her dignity and continue with her royal duties as if nothing had changed. Charles also discovered entries about Diana's relationship with their sons that showed aspects of her mothering he had never fully appreciated. The diary revealed Diana's careful efforts to shield William and Harry from the worst effects of their parents' troubled marriage while still preparing them for their future roles. Diana had written about her determination to give their children emotional tools that she felt the royal family traditionally lacked. The entries about Diana's charitable work revealed her frustration with the constraints placed on her activities by royal protocol. Charles read about Diana's desire to do more than just lend her name to causes. She had wanted to use her position to create real change in the world. The diary showed that Diana had felt held back by traditions and expectations that seemed more concerned with maintaining dignity than with actually helping people. As Charles continued reading, he found entries that showed Diana's growing confidence and independence in her final years. Rather than the bitter, vindictive woman that some courtiers had portrayed, the diary revealed someone who was finding her own voice and learning to use her influence effectively. Diana had written about her hopes for the future and her plans to create a new kind of royal role for herself, one that would allow her to make a meaningful difference while remaining true to her own values. The most shocking revelation for Charles came in entries describing Diana's awareness of how information about their private life was being leaked to the press. The diary showed that Diana had not been paranoid about being watched and monitored. She had been accurately observing a system that was designed to control her through public opinion. Charles realized that some of the advisors he had trusted had been manipulating both him and Diana for their own purposes. One entry from just weeks before Diana's death described her concerns about Charles's ability to be an effective king. But rather than attacking him personally, Diana had written about her worry that the system surrounding the monarchy was not preparing him properly for the challenges he would face. She had expressed hope that Charles would find ways to modernize the institution while preserving its essential dignity and purpose. As Charles finished reading the selected diary entries, he sat in his study for hours without speaking. The man who had emerged from these pages was not the husband he had thought himself to be, and the woman who had written these words was far more complex and forgiving than he had ever realized. For the first time since Diana's death, Charles began to understand not just what he had lost, but what he had failed to appreciate while he still had the chance to make different choices. The weight of Diana's revelations prompted Charles to make an unprecedented decision. For the first time since their divorce, he requested a private meeting with both William and Harry to discuss their mother's diary and its implications for all of them. The meeting was arranged for a weekend at Balmoral, away from the formal atmosphere of other royal residences. Charles wanted to speak to his sons, not as the heir to the throne, but as their father who was finally ready to confront the truth about their family's past. William and Harry arrived at Balmoral with mixed emotions. They had spent months processing their mother's words and trying to understand how her experiences would affect their own relationships with their father and the royal family. Both young men had questions they had never felt able to ask, and they hoped this conversation would provide answers that had been missing from their understanding of their parents' marriage. Charles began the conversation by acknowledging that he had read portions of their mother's diary and that her words had forced him to confront painful truths about himself and their marriage. The Prince of Wales looked older than his years as he sat across from his sons, struggling to find words that could bridge the gap between the man Diana had described in her diary and the father he wanted to be to William and Harry. The conversation that followed was unlike any the three men had ever shared. Charles spoke honestly about his failures as a husband, admitting that he had been unprepared for marriage and had made choices that hurt Diana deeply. He acknowledged that his relationship with Camilla had damaged their family in ways that he was only now beginning to fully understand. Charles told his sons that reading Diana's diary had shown him how his actions had affected not just his wife, but them as well. William, ever the diplomat, asked his father about the pressures that had shaped his decisions during those difficult years. Charles explained how the expectations placed on royal marriages had made it difficult for him to navigate his personal feelings while fulfilling his public duties. He spoke about feeling trapped between his obligations to the crown and his desire for personal happiness, and how that internal conflict had made him a distant and sometimes cruel husband to their mother. Harry, more direct in his approach, confronted his father about the specific incidents Diana had described in her diary. The young prince asked about the leaked stories, the attempts to control Diana's charitable work, and the way palace officials had treated their mother during the final years of the marriage. Charles was forced to admit that he had been either unaware of or complicit in actions that had caused Diana significant pain and isolation. The discussion revealed that Charles had been largely ignorant of how the royal system had been working against Diana. He had trusted advisors who had their own agendas and had failed to protect his wife from courtiers who saw her popularity as a threat to traditional royal hierarchy. Charles acknowledged that his inability to understand Diana's perspective had allowed others to manipulate the situation for their own purposes. As the conversation continued, Charles shared his own struggles with royal life and the expectations that had shaped him from childhood. He spoke about the loneliness of his position and his difficulty in forming genuine relationships when everyone around him had ulterior motives. Charles explained how his upbringing had not prepared him for the emotional demands of marriage and fatherhood, and how he had repeated patterns of behavior that he now recognized as damaging. Both William and Harry began to understand their father in a new light. While they could not excuse his treatment of their mother, they could see how the same system that had harmed Diana had also limited Charles's ability to be the husband and father he might have been under different circumstances. The princes began to grasp the complexity of royal life and the way it could corrupt even well-intentioned relationships. Charles made a commitment to his sons that he would use Diana's diary as an opportunity for genuine reform within the royal family. He promised that when he became king, he would work to eliminate the toxic influences that had made their mother's life so difficult. Charles spoke about creating a more modern monarchy that would value authenticity and emotional intelligence, alongside tradition and duty. The Prince of Wales also addressed the question of whether Diana's diary should be made public. Charles admitted that while the revelations would be personally embarrassing and professionally damaging, he recognized that their mother deserved to have her voice heard. He agreed to work with William and Harry to ensure that any public release of Diana's words would be handled with dignity and respect for her memory. During their discussions, Charles revealed that he had been having similar conversations with Queen Elizabeth about modernizing the monarchy. The diary's revelations had provided additional evidence for arguments he had been making about the need for change within the royal system. Charles expressed hope that Diana's insights could help guide the royal family toward a more sustainable and emotionally healthy future. The weekend at Balmoral marked a turning point in the relationship between Charles and his sons. For the first time, they were able to discuss their mother's death and its aftermath with complete honesty. Charles acknowledged the grief and anger that both princes had carried, and he took responsibility for his role in creating the circumstances that had led to their family's tragedy. William and Harry began to see their father not as the villain in their mother's story, but as another victim of a system that prioritized institution over individual well-being. This understanding did not excuse Charles's behavior, but it provided context that helped the princes make peace with their complex feelings about their parents' failed marriage. The conversations also revealed how Diana's influence continued to shape all three men. Charles spoke about how his late wife's approach to charitable work had influenced his own understanding of royal duty. William and Harry shared how their mother's example had inspired their own commitments to public service and their determination to use their positions to make positive changes in the world. As the weekend concluded, Charles made a promise to his sons that would have surprised many royal observers. He committed to ensuring that Diana's legacy would be honored not just in memorials and charitable foundations, but in the actual operations of the monarchy itself. Charles pledged that the lessons learned from Diana's experiences would guide his approach to kingship and help prevent future generations of royals from experiencing the isolation and manipulation that had characterized his own marriage. The three men left Balmoral with a new understanding of each other and a shared commitment to honoring Diana's memory through positive change. Charles had finally acknowledged the truth about his failed marriage, and William and Harry had gained insight into the complex forces that had shaped their family's tragedy. Most importantly, they had begun the process of healing wounds that had been festering for over 2 decades. 6 months after the discovery of Diana's diary, the royal family faced a decision that would define the monarchy's relationship with truth and transparency for generations to come. William and Harry, working closely with their father, had decided to release selected portions of their mother's writings in a carefully curated book that would be published on the 10th anniversary of her death. The announcement sent shockwaves through the establishment and captured the world's attention in ways that no one had anticipated. The decision to publish Diana's words was not made lightly. Charles had spent weeks consulting with constitutional experts, media advisors, and even foreign royalty about the potential consequences of such an unprecedented move. Never before had the private thoughts of a senior royal been made public in such an intimate and unfiltered way. The risk to the monarchy's reputation was enormous, but the potential for healing and genuine connection with the public was equally significant. The book, titled Diana, in Her Own Words, was structured to tell the story of Diana's evolution, from a shy young woman into a confident global humanitarian. The selected diary entries focused on her personal growth, her relationship with her children, and her developing understanding of how royal influence could be used to create positive change. The most damaging revelations about other family members were carefully omitted, but enough truth was included to give readers an authentic glimpse into Diana's inner world. The public reaction to Diana's diary exceeded all expectations. Within hours of the book's release, it became clear that people around the world had been hungry for exactly this kind of honest insight into royal life. Diana's voice, speaking directly from the pages about her struggles and triumphs, created an emotional connection that reminded everyone why she had been so beloved during her lifetime. The book topped bestseller lists in dozens of countries and sparked conversations about authenticity, duty, and the human cost of public service. Charles found himself in the unexpected position of receiving praise for his courage in allowing his former wife's criticisms of him to be published. Many commentators noted that his willingness to face public scrutiny demonstrated a maturity and strength that had not always been evident during his marriage to Diana. The Prince of Wales had gambled his reputation on the belief that truth would ultimately serve the monarchy better than continued secrecy, and early indications suggested that his instinct had been correct. The diary's revelations about the toxic culture within royal circles prompted immediate changes in how the monarchy operated. Several longtime advisors quietly resigned or were reassigned to less influential positions. Charles implemented new protocols designed to prevent the kind of manipulation and information warfare that had characterized the 1990s. The Prince of Wales made it clear that loyalty to the institution would now be measured by service to the family's well-being, not by willingness to engage in political scheming. William and Harry found themselves dealing with intense media attention as journalists and commentators analyzed their decision to publish their mother's private thoughts. Both princes appeared in a joint television interview where they explained their reasoning and discussed what they had learned from reading their mother's diary. William spoke eloquently about how Diana's words had helped him understand the woman behind the public image, while Harry was more emotional in describing how his mother's insights had shaped his own approach to royal duty. The interview revealed that both princes had been profoundly affected by their mother's political awareness and her understanding of global issues. Diana's diary entries about meeting world leaders and developing strategies for international humanitarian work had shown her sons that she had been far more than just a beautiful princess. She had been a serious thinker who understood how to use soft power to create meaningful change. This revelation inspired both William and Harry to approach their own royal duties with greater intellectual rigor and strategic thinking. The publication of Diana's diary also had unexpected effects on other members of the royal family. Queen Elizabeth, who had initially been concerned about the potential damage to the monarchy's reputation, found that the public response was overwhelmingly positive. People appreciated the royal family's willingness to be vulnerable and honest about their mistakes. The Queen began to see that the monarchy's survival in the modern world might depend on exactly this kind of authentic engagement with the public. Camilla. Parker Bowles faced perhaps the most difficult situation of anyone affected by the diary's publication. Diana's entries about her had been largely sympathetic, portraying Camilla not as a villain, but as another person caught up in circumstances beyond her control. However, the public attention was intense and often hostile. Charles stood by Camilla throughout the controversy, publicly acknowledging his gratitude for her patience and understanding during this difficult period. His loyalty to her actually improved his public image, as people saw evidence of his capacity for commitment and growth. The international response to Diana's diary was equally significant. Foreign governments and royal families watched closely to see how the British monarchy would survive such unprecedented transparency. Many were surprised to find that honesty strengthened rather than weakened the institution. Several other European royal families began their own processes of modernization and increased openness, seeing Diana's diary as proof that authenticity could coexist with royal dignity. The charitable organizations that Diana had supported found renewed interest and funding as her diary entries reminded the world of her passionate commitment to helping others. Diana's detailed descriptions of her work with AIDS patients, landmine victims, and homeless individuals inspired a new generation of activists and philanthropists. The Diana Memorial Fund experienced its largest donation influx since the years immediately following her death. Charles himself underwent a remarkable transformation in public perception. His willingness to allow Diana's criticisms to be published, combined with his obvious efforts to learn from her insights, earned him respect that had eluded him for decades. The Prince of Wales began speaking more openly about mental health, emotional intelligence, and the importance of authentic relationships. His public appearances became less formal and more engaging as he applied lessons learned from Diana's approach to connecting with people. The diary's publication also sparked important conversations about privacy, consent, and the ethics of posthumous revelations. Legal scholars debated whether Diana's family had the right to publish her private thoughts, while ethicists discussed the balance between public interest and personal privacy. These debates ultimately led to new guidelines for handling the private papers of public figures, ensuring that future revelations would be handled with appropriate care and consideration. As the first anniversary of the diary's publication approached, its impact on the royal family's relationship with the public was undeniable. Opinion polls showed that support for the monarchy had increased significantly, particularly among younger generations who appreciated the family's willingness to acknowledge past mistakes and commit to positive change. Diana's voice, speaking from beyond the grave, had accomplished what years of traditional royal public relations could not. She had made the monarchy relevant and relatable to a new generation. The success of Diana's diary also influenced how William and Harry approached their own public roles. Both princes began keeping their own journals, recording their thoughts and experiences as they navigated royal life in the modern world. They spoke openly about their hope that future generations of royals would learn from their families' experiences and build on the foundation of authenticity that Diana's diary had established. In the end, Diana's hidden diary accomplished exactly what she had hoped it would during her lifetime. Her words forced the royal family to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their institution. More importantly, her insights provided a roadmap for creating a more humane and effective monarchy that could serve the public while preserving the dignity and traditions that made it valuable. Diana's final gift to her family and her country was not just the truth about her own experiences, but a vision of what the monarchy could become if it had the courage to embrace honesty, compassion, and genuine connection with the people it served. The woman who had once felt silenced and marginalized had found a way to speak across the years, transforming not just how the world remembered her, but how her own family understood their purpose and their potential. Diana's diary had indeed left Charles speechless and unnerved, but ultimately it had given him and his sons the tools they needed to honor her memory through meaningful change and authentic service.